when the HOA's queen bee threatened to snuff out my flourishing garden. I never expected a rowdy crew of kids and a rogue goose to turn my crops into a community revolution. As I watched Karen storm off into her perfectly manicured domain, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, knee-deep in an ocean of greens, supporting the community with fresh vegetables, while she treated my thriving crop field like a patch of dandelions, trying to invade her pristine lawn. My tomatoes were practically begging for a salad, and yet Karen's flower-obsessed heart remained uncompromising. With the determination of a woman standing on the front lines against tyranny, I vowed I wouldn't let her turn my bounty into barren land. Just as the thought crossed my mind, I felt a small hand tug at my shirt, the enthusiastic, sandy-haired whirlwind known as Tommy Ramirez, ready to spring into action. "Mrs. Thompson, don't worry. I'll gather the neighborhood kids and we'll make a sign," he proclaimed, his green eyes sparkling with mischief. Tommy was a natural-born instigator, ready to turn this pettiness into an epic battle of lawn versus crops. I could almost see the wheels turning in his clever mind as he sprinted off, leaving me amid my vegetables to brainstorm how to ensure that my crops would not only thrive but also win the hearts of our contentious community. Perhaps a well-placed "Yummy Veggies Ahead" sign would do the trick? Just as I was plotting the details, I recalled my neighbors, several of whom had voiced their support for my little garden project before Karen's unwelcome entry. They just needed a gentle reminder of the harvest's bounty, and most importantly, that the only things they'd be losing if we caved were their future pasta nights and the suddenly mythical homegrown tomato sauce. The following day, armed with bright paint, some boards, and a raucous group of young supporters, I decided to proclaim my revolution in color. "Community food source ahead," we painted on one large sign, alongside Tommy's brilliant rendition of a tomato, complete with a smiley face. The kids giggled and bounced around like the mischievous sprites they were. Even Karen's frown could only grow broader as she surveyed my intrusions, standing dangerously close to the property line while I grinned like a child on Christmas morning. Tommy's jovial laughter, combined with the sight of a sizzling sign, turned my resilient garden into a petty protest, and I half wondered if Karen would experience a stroke just from witnessing the defiance of unruly vegetables and their tiny architects. I had no intention of backing down. After all, it was a rich comedy flourished with life and laughter. I could almost hear the cracks in the facade of Karen's superiority as I pranced about, watering my tomatoes and harvesting lettuce for the upcoming community food drive. At least a few neighbors had begun to poke their heads over their expertly trimmed hedges, intrigued enough by the ruckus to come see what all the fuss was about. As Mrs. Peterson from 3 houses down ambled over with her apron still dusted from her own Sunday baking, she couldn't resist a jab. "You know, Karen just hates things that don't fit her perfect vision, right? Keep it up, Jamie." There was nothing quite as sweet as the crisp morning air mingling with the delicious scent of tomatoes, while the seeds of revolution took hold, bolstered by amused onlookers and kids volunteering to help harvest the joy that was, apparently, all mine. But karma had its own delightful plans in the back of the food chain. One late afternoon, just as I settled in to savor the fruits of our labor, which had turned into an overflow of fresh veggies, Tommy signaled that the neighborhood was gathering. My crop had magically transformed into a neighborhood staple, with bags of produce flying out into grateful hands. Each child giggled and waved goodbye to families as they promised to return for more. Then, like a quintessential storm, Karen appeared, hair perfectly styled, brows raised high into the unmistakable temple of disdain. Only this time, the sight of it didn't send me into a panic. It was almost comical, really. She stood there, hands akimbo, eyes squinting at the spectacle of my community, flourishing thanks to the very crops she sought to destroy. The expressions on my neighbors' faces as she ranted gave me a surge of courageous merriment. "You see, Karen," I called, stepping forward with a mock seriousness. "This isn't just a blight on the community. You're witnessing a celebration. We, the humble citizens of Bramblewood Drive, have discovered the simple pleasure in reviving our old gardening ways. And thank you for the inspiration." Laughter erupted like a patch of wildflowers in spring. The tides were changing, shifting from boredom to delightful chaos as spontaneous chit-chats erupted on the airwaves, and even my tomatoes looked brighter in solidarity. Would Karen's beige world actually burst with color and laughter, or would she retreat like the sour note of a wilted leaf? "Look at what you're missing," I added with a grin, waving over the fresh veggie bags like I was presenting the latest fashion ensemble on a runway in Paris. The community stood behind me, flourish, and laughter fully blossomed, their collective energy a stark contrast to the nuclear frown that danced upon Karen's face. In that moment, she seemed small, almost cartoonish against the vibrant backdrop of my thriving crop. This might have been a ridiculous feud over some tomatoes and peppers, but I was here to stay, and together with the neighborhood, we'd plant not only crops but put an end to the tyranny of aesthetics. Could it be that Karen's reign of meticulous perfection was finally at a humorous end? "Oh, is that what we're calling it now?" Karen's voice sliced through our cheerful chatter like a serrated knife through a ripe tomato. She glared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and indignation, as if I had just announced I was converting my backyard into a unicorn sanctuary. The neighborhood kids paused mid-giggle, their enthusiasm momentarily replaced by fascination as the ultimate showdown approached. "A celebration?" she continued, hands firmly planted on her hips. "You're defying our community standards. The very essence of this neighborhood is at stake." Oh, how it was almost poetic. The overseer of banal perfection thundering about essence like a Broadway diva who'd lost her opening night. As she ranted, however, I couldn't help but feel an undercurrent of amusement bubbling within me. Behind her, my neighbors had grouped together, their expressions a delightful cocktail of schadenfreude and rebellion. Karen, with her meticulously manicured garden and her ironclad rules, was being put in her place by a band of children wielding smiles and spaghetti squash. It was almost enough to make me believe in the power of the universe, aligning against self-important tyrants. I took a slow, theatrical breath before responding, letting the anticipation of my words loom like summer thunder, ready to rain on her parade. "And what have you brought to this neighborhood, Karen? Immaculate lawns void of joy?" She opened her mouth, likely conjuring some snappy retort about the aesthetic integrity of our community, when suddenly a loud squawk emanated from the sky above. A rogue goose, as if sent by the universe to accentuate my point, plummeted down from its lofty path, landing clumsily in the middle of my crop field directly behind me. Tommy erupted in laughter, pointing wildly at the confused bird as it waddled about in utter bewilderment. "Look, Karen, even the goose knows where the real action is." The other kids erupted into giggles, and I felt a wave of solidarity ripple through my neighbors. Karen's eyes, now narrowed, were darting from me to the decidedly raucous children, brow twitching in frustration as if considering whether to assist the goose in waddling back to its rightful perch in the perfect neighborhood sky. Our little tableau, the rebellious crew of veggie lovers versus the uptight HOA overlord, seemed to restock my original confidence. Tommy, emboldened by our absurd tactical advantage of a goose, suddenly raised his pitch just above the gathered chatter. "Aunt Jamie, we should teach Karen how to make a salad," he yelled, and just like that, the children were off, galloping toward the bounty of vegetables, ready to propagate their newfound rebellion through culinary arts. "Salad party," they chanted, the sound echoing down the street as they gathered tomatoes and cucumbers like little vegetable warriors. Meanwhile, Karen stood there, frozen, rooted to her perfect spot as if she were trying to outlast a natural disaster. I swear I could see the gears of her mind turning. Did she really want to storm away? Or would she stay and confront what was rapidly becoming an insurrection fueled purely on fresh produce? As I watched Tommy demonstrate the art of salad making, gallantly plucking tomatoes and handing them to the other kids like they were Olympic medals, something shifted in the air. The neighbors, spurred by their children's enthusiasm and fueled by the delightful affront we were mounting against the HOA, began to drift closer. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads, the soft nods of agreement from previous supporters solidifying into a united front. Even Mrs. Peterson was ambushed with a zucchini. Look, Karen, it's community spirit in full force. Do you think we can fit a community barn dance in here too? My voice was layered with playful sarcasm, and the crowd responded with another round of laughter. Witnessing Karen struggle to assemble a rebuttal was arguably becoming one of the highlights of my garden journey. In that moment, with my neighbors hooting and hollering over our salad brigade, I felt a surge of victory washing over me. Perhaps Karen had underestimated the power of community love over her nitpicky edicts. You see, Karen, I replied, allowing myself to radiate a smugness that came with asserting one's right to grow fresh food. These kids don't care about your property nonsense. They care about what's fresh, fun, and laughably abundant. So maybe it's time for you to take off those oversized sunglasses of judgment and see this for what it is, a chance to connect. The goose, sensing the harmonious atmosphere, waddled over to me as if delivering a stamp of approval, and for a split second, I wondered if I should now add Goose Whisperer to my resume. Karen's mouth moved silently for several seconds, her facial expression oscillating between indignation and bewilderment. The peas and carrots were literally being redefined before her very eyes, painted in the colors of community, laughter, and a little bit of chaos. I couldn't decide whether she would flee or stay to have a tantrum in the middle of my lettuce patch. But as I stood surrounded by grinning faces, my heart buoyed at the absurdity of it all. I couldn't help but hope that maybe the snobbish reign she had held over our neighborhood was less fortified than the stakes she'd insisted on erecting. Wasn't it time, I thought, with a tinge of mischief, for a new reign of kindness, laughter, and perhaps a generous salad buffet along Bramblewood Drive? Just then, a particularly rambunctious Tommy burst out from the crowd, brandishing a garden spade like a trophy. Aunt Jamie, maybe we could form a gardening club. We could all be called the Radical Rascals of Raw Veggies. His enthusiasm was infectious, and the kids rallied behind him, chanting their new moniker as if it were the title of a rock band. Even Mrs. Peterson joined in, proclaiming, "I'll be the vice president of snacks." In that moment, Karen's pristine facade cracked just a smidge as she erupted into an eye roll that could have sent a less persistent goose running for cover. Here I was, surrounded by a miniature army of young garden crusaders, wielding zucchini like swords, ready to fight for their right to have a salad party in our little utopia, and she was standing there, poised like an underwhelmed jury member, ready to declare a mistrial. As the salad-making fracas continued, I noticed several parents peeking out from behind their meticulously trimmed hedges, curiosity piqued by the absurdity of it all. Perhaps it was the gathering of exuberant kids. Perhaps it was the fragrant dance of herbs teasing their nostrils. Or maybe they just wanted to experience the thrill of rebellion against the HOA's iron grip. One by one, they stepped tentatively onto the scene, alleviating the collective tension in the air. "I brought some feta for the salad," shouted Mr. Roberts from next door, who was known more for his poker nights than his culinary skills. The absurdity, combined with his humble offering, caused an uproarious cheer, sending Karen's meticulously styled hair frizzing slightly as she realized she was woefully outnumbered. The more the neighbors joined our growing garden fiesta, the more agitated Karen became, her eyes narrowing as she frantically glanced around, desperately searching for a way to reassert her stance. Can a gal enjoy her prim little kingdom without the clamor of fresh produce murmuring its insurrection all around her? "This party is a violation of HOA bylaws," she finally shouted, her voice inflected with a quivering mix of desperation and disbelief. But her declaration was met with peals of laughter, as though the neighborhood had spontaneously become a community production of a hilariously out-of-touch play. "Oh, please. Your bylaws can't possibly stand against the legendary power of salad," I quipped, my sarcasm bolstered by the collective giggle of spectators. I felt like a director at the helm of a well-rehearsed farce, and all eyes were on Karen for her next act, which I suspected was only humanly possible as a high-speed march off to file paperwork laden with complaints. "Karen, this is about more than just our salad-tastic soiree," I persisted, planting my hands defiantly on my hips. "This is about understanding what it means to be a community. not a bland collection of lawns devoid of laughter and life. As my words hung in the air, a rogue breeze swept through, causing leaves to dance and twirl around us, as if the universe itself were cheerleading for our cause. Clucking under her breath, Karen tore her gaze from our joyful chaos, her plans for property enforcement clearly unraveling. It was as if I could see her cogs starting to rust, unwilling to turn anymore in the face of such delightful disobedience. And it only got better. A trio of children, equipped with wit and nerve, stormed over with leafy crowns fashioned from chard and basil. Reality had officially morphed into a comedy show, and I was all in. With a flourish, the kids donned their leafy royalty, declaring themselves the salad sovereigns, and rambunctiously resumed their vegetable harvest. As they cartwheeled by, Karen was forced to bear witness to the delightful irony of it all, the true essence of community shining like glistening olive oil over a fresh caprese salad, while her meticulous rules faded into the background like neglected compost. Seeing the joy and kindness sprouting from our crop, I felt a chorus of heartfelt connections enveloping the gathered throng, all held together by a veneration for simple moments of togetherness and laughter. The sound of giggles turned into jubilant shouts of joy, lifting the spirits of everyone involved. Even some skeptical adults, on the outskirts of the gathering, caught smiles as their hearts softened amidst the playful vegetable ruckus. I spotted Karen's expression morphing from outrage to something softer, perhaps bewilderment or reluctant amusement, and I nudged forward with a teaspoon of irony that felt well-earned. Well, Karen, it looks like everyone here has embraced the essence of community far more than your designated ideals could ever encapsulate. With that, I offered her a salad bowl overflowing with vibrant greens, garnished with a sprig of fresh basil for good measure. The surrounding families burst into bemused chuckles, watching with wide eyes as the head of the HOA employed an expression that was a mix between a sardonic smirk and struggling to uphold her now crumbling image of authority. Would she take the proverbial salad and join the party? Or would she dissolve back into her world of meticulously kept standards? Let's just say, in that moment, while laughter rang through the air like joyous trumpets heralding my victory, I imagined what it must be like to choose between a refreshing salad and the harsh confines of her rigid world. Would she leap into the vibrant colors of life, or wind up just as disconnected as the goose flapping unwittingly in our playful victory dance? Whatever her decision, one thing was for certain. This shindig was solidifying itself as the best community gathering Bramblewood Drive had seen in years. As the laughter continued to ripple through the gathered crowd, Karen stood awkwardly, a full bowl of salad just out of reach, her impeccably manicured nails twitching in disapproval. The sight of a gaggle of children declaring themselves salad sovereigns, as though they were miniature monarchs strode forth with grand proclamations of veggie-related mischief, seemed to unsettle her even more. In her world, joy was merely a fine linen and ordering lunch on a Tuesday. Now it was a fragmented painting of chaos sketched out on a sun-drenched lawn, and it was almost too delicious to witness. I couldn't help but feel a potent sense of vindication wash over me. This was the moment that we were no longer dictated to by the whims of self-appointed rulers, but rather a tapestry of vibrant life woven together by the bonds of community. But oh, it wasn't just Karen's perplexity that made everything marvelous. No, it was the palpable waves of camaraderie conspiring against her tyrannical reign. Susanna Miller, the retired librarian with a heart of gold and a sharp wit to match, decided now was her moment to shine. With a loud laugh, she stepped forward, planting her hands on her hips and addressing the assembled neighbors. Everyone, this is the perfect time to establish our very own Bramblewood Farmers Market. We can host it right here on my backyard after all this herbivore extravaganza. It'll be fresher than the priciest brunch at that cafe downtown. Complaints about HOA restrictions faded away amidst the shared vision of locally grown produce, laughter, and the promise of fresh organic goodies that could reignite community spirit. I couldn't believe it. A farmer's market? This was the ultimate act of rebellion, the lid bursting off any whim that Karen thought she could impose on us. The glee of the crowd swelled, and I felt a delightful itch to clap my hands together to pull them closer, like they were about to witness the grand unveiling of a magic trick. Kids high-fived each other and ran, declaring that they would man the veggie stand while their mommies baked the goods. If chaos was what Karen was trying to thwart, well, she had mistakenly summoned an entire carnival of merriment out of thin air. I exchanged glances with Tommy, his eyes sparkling with awestruck excitement. Even the expression on Karen's face, it was as if she chewed on a particularly sour lemon and was waiting for the essential balance of sweetness to arrive. But then it dawned on me. The power of collaboration lay not just in our collective love for the crops, but in the quiet understanding between neighbors. As the dusk began to cast long shadows, neighbors draped around like patches of cloth in a quilt, exchanged ideas and recipes for everything from zucchini bread to heirloom tomato salsa. I watched as Karen's earlier fortitude evaporated. The carefully thought-out bylaw defenses she wielded against me were now flimsier than lettuce in a windstorm. A dozen voices rang through the air, sharing what they loved about homegrown produce, painting the evening in hues of camaraderie and good-natured banter. Everyone seemed united in purpose, and for once, the only ruckus we faced was that of clinking glasses and choruses of endless recipes, rather than Karen's unreasonable authority. As I surveyed the scene, I caught snippets of conversations and laughter floating in the air like fireflies at dusk. Children danced frenetically, their laughter mixing with the distant sound of clinking forks, creating a joyful symphony that echoed through the neighborhood. In the middle of this spectacle, I had a fleeting vision of Karen, perhaps a little less imposing but still presenting herself as resolute. She was observing it all, arms crossed and brows furrowed. "This cannot be happening," I imagined her silently screaming into the abyss of her perfectly white blouse. The sparkle of community unity around her was like a glitter bomb exploding in slow motion, and there she was, the unfortunate queen of static. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any more delightful, like a cherry atop a sundae, Karen took a hesitant step forward, finally questioning the moving tide she couldn't control. "Well then, say you go ahead with this farmer's market. What will you do about the bylaws?" she finally dared. As if orchestrated, the crowd turned to me, waiting for my reply, their offering of solidarity hanging like ripe fruit on the vine. With a grin, I turned to Karen, feeling triumphant. "Why, Karen, we're creating a new set of bylaws. By the power bestowed upon us by the community spirit, we shall ensure that Bramblewood thrives on laughter, homegrown goodness, and a splash of whimsy, one salad at a time." The burst of cheers that erupted almost knocked Karen back a step, and I almost expected someone to set off confetti cannons anywhere nearby. Karen's stunned expression melted into reluctant acceptance, etched with the contrast of despair and newfound appreciation. The power of community could indeed demolish even the tallest of walls. I could almost see a flicker of envy in her eyes, a possibility she could have dared to dream about. In the clamor of children chanting, "Salad sovereigns unite," and neighbors pitching in with recipes and excited discussions, I realized this was our moment, woven from laughter and solidarity. In that moment, the weeds of entitlement Karen represented stood no chance against the sprawling roots of community laughter taking hold. I couldn't help but wonder, could she ever truly understand the value of what was growing around us? Or would she forever long for the days when a perfectly manicured lawn ruled over this slice of paradise? The buzz surrounding the Bramblewood Farmers Market swept through the neighborhood like the intoxicating aroma of fresh baked cookies wafting on a summer breeze. I could practically hear the coherence of our cause unify to a crescendo as I caught sight of the colorful array of customers forming in Susanna's backyard. Each pop of color represented not just the produce, but the vibrant personalities rallying against the gloomy monochrome of Karen's tyranny. Children darted around with brand new aprons, their commit and destroy enthusiasm for the veggie stand mirrored only by the decorum of adults trying to establish some semblance of order inside the market. Yet order was the last thing we wanted. From the outside looking in, it was a glorious mess that spoke of spontaneity, joy, and, dare I say, a delightful hint of chaos. As the day unfolded, Tommy and his crew of self-proclaimed salad sovereigns carved out their empire amidst the vibrant stalls where laughter bubbled like the finest champagne. An extreme burst of energy permeated the air as our veggie stand attracted children like moths to a flame. Cabbages transformed into missile-launching devices, and every unsuspecting carrot became fair game for insistent little hands. "Hey, who wants to join my Kale Crushers Club?" Tommy bellowed, leading a march of bright-eyed cohorts who were equally concerned about the kale's well-being and the ongoing operations of their glitter-encrusted veggie stand. Parents clapped and cheered while Karen, surveying like a hawk, appeared uncertain whether to swoop down in righteous judgment or call for an airlift of defeat. But the day took an unexpected turn when, just as we were in the middle of a best zucchini in Bramblewood competition, Karen decided to join the fray, her mood undoubtedly grumbling, like an unbalanced washing machine. Decked out in her starched designer blouse, she approached the market stall with her customary authority, as if she were entering a lion's den fully armed with a feather duster of bylaw enforcement. "This isn't a legitimate market. It violates Section 3B of the HOA rulebook," she declared, her lip curling in a disdainful sneer. Perhaps she didn't detect how the crowd formed an invisible barrier around me, reinforcing our shared goal of community. One more indignation from Karen, and I could sense a chorus of, "Now wait just a minute," rising from the masses like something out of a superhero movie. A few neighbors shuffled forward, glaring daggers more intimidating than her statement necklaces. "Oh, really, Karen?" Susanna stepped up, effortlessly twirling an heirloom tomato in her hand like a baton. "What section of your precious rulebook covers community joy and friendship? Besides, I'd argue good tomatoes are worth at least 3 bylaws." The crowd erupted into laughter and cheers, the sound filling the afternoon sun with warmth. I felt like a conductor, waving my arms to orchestrate this magnificent symphony of camaraderie, while Karen paled slightly, as if a gust of wind threatened to carry her away. Joy, I thought, is much more powerful than the grasp of your rules. It was as if the wind itself decided to ruffle her perfectly coiffed hair just to deliver the final blow, and the sight was worthy of any sitcom scene. Settling the laughter, I took a step toward Karen, whose permanent scowl now seemed like a mask teetering on the edge of adorably irrational. "Karen," I began, my tone as sweet as summer lemonade, "it's clear that the HOA overlooks a very vital part of this community, the human connection. This market isn't just about selling vegetables. It's about growth, imagination, and togetherness." I felt majestic delivering my lines, channeling every ounce of patience I could muster to create a bridge instead of a wall. It was fulfilling and oddly ironic to preach about collaboration, just as she was desperately clinging to her iron grip. Each word I spoke seemed to dangle enticingly before her, and I reveled slightly in the moral high ground. For the first time in our seemingly endless standoff, I saw something shift in Karen's expression. A flicker of realization, or resignation perhaps. It danced across her features, if only for a moment. I was almost taken aback by the subtle shift in her furrowed brows. Could the formidable Karen be entertaining thoughts beyond her fortress of bylaws? But before this wild theory could form a concrete conclusion, a little girl, no older than 6, trotted up to her, waving her hands. "You should try our cucumber slices. They're the best." The innocent enthusiasm and vulnerability mixed with sheer unadulterated joy seemed to crack the hard shell around Karen ever so slightly. Melting under the weight of this little ambassador of goodwill, Karen managed a shaky yet bemused smile, and the sea of spectators gasped audibly while holding their breath, waiting for an unpredictable response. Would she brush it all away, or was she finally relenting? To my surprise, she gingerly clasped one of the offered cucumbers, her fingers dancing around the edges, as if it were a fragile artifact rather than a mere vegetable. Well, if I were to think about it," she muttered, her voice dipping into softer undertones, as if catching a breeze of connection for the first time. The community stirred, sharing surprised glances, pulsating with encouragement. Here we were, on the brink of change. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of Bramblewood synchronizing, the threads of unity weaving into a masterpiece that stood defiantly against the despotism of entitlement. It was the moment I had hoped for yet never dared imagine. Could Karen truly be swayed by a humble cucumber and the love of a neighborhood built on shared spirit? The jubilant spark in Tommy's eyes echoed my own. Could this be the turning point we needed for our beloved community? The crowd murmured with excitement, inching closer as if they were catching wind of a magnificent secret about to unfold right before their very eyes. Karen's stubborn composure visibly cracked under our shared gaze, and I couldn't help but wonder, would this be the day Bramblewood blossomed into something even more magnificent, or would it retreat back behind the fortress of rules? I choked back laughter at the sheer absurdity all around us and held my breath for momentous change to happen, leaving us teetering on the edge of an uncharted future. Would they see the truth? Would tonight mark the inception of a new era for us all? It was as if time stretched in that pivotal moment, each heartbeat ricocheting through the throng of neighbors, caught in their own web of hopes and aspirations. What began as a simple moment of defiance against Karen's perennial frown morphed into a captivating showdown of wills. Friends whispered words of encouragement, glancing at Karen as if she were a riddle waiting to be solved. Her fingers hovered suspiciously close to the cucumber slice, wavering between her innate skepticism and an ephemeral ounce of curiosity. Every eye in the crowd locked onto her like reluctant students awaiting the teacher's verdict on a surprise pop quiz. And oh, was this about to get spicy? My mind raced with possibilities, pondering which historical moments this little showdown would rival. Would it resemble David versus Goliath? Or perhaps an opera, a tragic crescendo that would end with Karen suddenly triumphing over the farmers' rebellion, or worse, stomping away in defeat, her tailored pantsuit fluttering in defeat like a flag of surrender. I could almost picture it, storefronts adorned with Karen's Cucumbers advertisements, while the community chortled in delight all across Bramblewood. But the melodrama played out before me in reality as I wrestled with my inner thoughts. "Don't crack yet, don't crack yet," I chanted in my head. And surprisingly, so did the supporting cast of neighbors. With daring courage fueled by a dozen zucchinis and an unruly squad of salad sovereigns behind me, I ventured forth, stepping into the void created by our collective anticipation. "How does that cucumber taste, Karen?" I inquired, lightheartedly. "And while you're at it, I'd be glad to show you how to grow your very own bumper crop in the monstrous void of HOA rules." The laughter that erupted was infectious, transforming everyday neighbors into boisterous supporters, each one leaning in closer to witness the showdown. Karen's stance faltered, with her impeccably manicured brow slightly softening, not that anyone noticed at that height of excitement. Tommy, his eyes wide with mischief, seized the moment. "Yeah, Karen, you can grow cucumbers for your famous 10 Rules of Veggie Growing class," he yelled, proudly puffing out his chest. "And I'd like to remind everyone that Karen's community garden is a violation of Section 7A of the HOA rulebook." The quip sent waves of laughter crashing through the crowd, drowning out any semblance of Karen's carefully polished retorts. For the first time that day, I saw a crack in her armor. It might as well have been the Grand Canyon as she struggled to mask her flustered expression. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, hungry for her response. How delicious it was to watch her flail silently as fellow neighbors joined Tommy in this playful rebellion, each one spinning a mythos around her invincible image. "I heard Karen tried to grow tomatoes once, and they turned into prunes," cried out one neighbor, a wink betraying the fully fledged absurdity that had now overtaken Bramblewood. Cheers erupted, hands clapped, and I felt a delightful tingle run down my spine. A delightful shift was at play, a revolution sowed in laughter and community spirit, a transformation stronger than any bylaws she'd ever flung at us. Even as I fought the urge to join in their gleeful mockery, I felt empowered to observe the communal strength unfurling like our tattered banner. With each passing second, Karen's image as the tyrant of Bramblewood began melting like butter on a hot skillet. "You think this is funny?" she blustered at last, putting a hand on her hip, her defenses crumbling faster than the last crust of my mom's infamous pie. But the collective laugh echoed louder than her indignation, an erupting crescendo that knew no bounds. "No, Karen," I finally interjected with a smirk, twirling a bunch of bright green celery like magic wands in the childlike frenzy around me. "We think it's absurd and magnificent that you've been so outlistened by a cucumber. Let's bask in this tomato-scented victory together." The camaraderie began to resemble a powerful force of nature as the crowd edged closer to Karen, inquisitive and intrigued. "Join us, Karen," someone shouted, throwing in a good-natured challenge amidst the riotous applause. "We'll make this a community affair, not a Karen affair. Share some hearty soup instead of the cook-off you had planned with the HOA." Tommy burst forth, asserting with all the convincing charm of a 12-year-old in full crisis of rebellion. "You can make it with the very produce you'll be growing, of course." It was buoyancy and laughter on a scale that even the dreaded rulebook couldn't dull. I couldn't help but savor the ecstasy of our predicament. The moment grew ripe with anticipation, and self-importance began to peel off Karen like overly processed cheese from yesterday's lunch. Her eyes flitted to her self-proclaimed royal entourage, none of whom dared venture to support her now. Silence pulsed through the air as she hesitated, contemplating whether to join the fray or retreat into her world of rules while clutching her pride. What a delicious moment it was, one that could go down in the chronicles of Bramblewood as the great vegetable revelry, and I dared hope to coax her spirit out from the confines of opposing forces. As she took a breath, a deep one that echoed with difficult decisions, I felt the weight of possibility stirring frenzy and delight among us. Would she leap from her pedestal of authority or retreat behind her fortress as we anxiously awaited her yield? As the tension reached a boiling point, I could practically hear the gears turning in Karen's meticulously organized mind. Would she really risk losing all semblance of dignity by embracing the chaos that surrounded her? She blinked, clearly weighing the pros and cons of joining the very community she'd so desperately tried to control. Meanwhile, I could see the tide of support swelling around me, every neighbor, ready to extend an olive branch or perhaps, more fittingly, a zucchini. It was at this moment that the incredible absurdity of our situation washed over me. Here we were, a gaggle of grown-ups and children alike, fielding colorful vegetables like they were carnival prizes, calling out to the HOA queen, all while showing exactly how vibrant and alive our community was. "Karen, come on! You might even discover you have a green thumb," I dared, coyly waving a leaf of kale in her direction as if it were a secret handshake of rebellion. The crowd erupted in a chorus of giggles when Karen finally took a step forward, her tailored pantsuit offering quite the contrast to the worn flannel shirts and cargo shorts that surrounded her. "I don't need to grow anything, thank you," she huffed, imperiously puffing out her chest like a peacock, attempting to strut through a field of wildflowers. Still, there she was, teetering at the edge of her own self-doubt. The faux authority of her stately blouse and oversized earrings began to dissolve against the wave of mirth sweeping through Bramblewood, each chuckle a strand of thread, pulling down the meticulously woven tapestry of her power. Yet just when I thought she might finally engage and join my merry band of homegrown marauders, her eyes flared back to their previous indignation. "Is this really how you want to shape the future of our community? What about the rules?" The sheer drama of her next words hung heavy in the air, as if she were about to drop a bombshell while we assembled our makeshift salad brigade. But in the very act of proposing her argument, she unwittingly became the butt of our communal joke. "Rules are like herbs, Karen, useful in moderation, but too much time makes everything bitter," quipped Tommy, his delightfully mischievous spirit bubbling over. The crowd guffawed, shaking heads in wonder at his audacity. As laughter echoed off garden fences and sparked more animated discussions, it became painfully clear she had crossed into the realm of ridicule, and as a weary general, she was quickly losing the battle. The realization seemed to sink in, leaving her floundering as she tried to reestablish the authoritarian landscape she'd spent years crafting. And just like that, the invisible chains of Karen's superiority began to rust. Oh, come now. We can certainly find a way to use the land for gardens. Karen began. An unexpected shift. I suppose I could share some tips. And who doesn't want the freshest produce for their table, am I right? Why did it feel like I was watching her on a cheesy reality show, where the villain suddenly finds redemption after a surprise plot twist? What was next? A community service project, managed under the watchful gaze of Karen's stringent leadership. I couldn't help it. My laughter burst forth. Seeing her struggle to smear life back into her dug-in beliefs was deliciously humorous, almost too good to be true. However, her attempt didn't pass unnoticed by the assembly. They remained skeptical, watching her like hawks as they quipped amongst themselves. Is this a new HOA requirement, or will we have cabbage contests? In that whirlwind of banter and possibility, it struck me that Karen's gradual metamorphosis wasn't merely about politicizing our veggie fight. It was an awakening of sorts. For, from the ashes of her authoritative pride, a new Karen was sprouting, one who might actually inspire rather than intimidate. Let's call it a community cabbage council, she asserted suddenly, almost childlike in her eagerness to reshape herself in the vibrant kaleidoscope of the situation. It was as though a pact had formed between her and the garden, complete with tomatoes and peace on the horizon. But to call her the crop commander just felt like too much of a stretch. However, I did appreciate her renewed commitment, albeit with a whiff of skepticism in my mind. As I relished this fantastic upheaval, Tommy bounced on his toes with an exuberance hard to suppress. Hey, we could have zucchini races. And Karen, you could finally earn your stripes. And oh, how sweet the moment was. I couldn't help but join in, picturing neighborhood celebrations filled with laughter, produce-themed games, and an unapologetic wave of sass aimed at the new ordinances we'd unknowingly enacted against Karen's crystal ball of regulation. All around me, laughter weaved up like ivy, filling the gaps in this improvised community tapestry of ours, the patch now echoing the merriment of unguarded fellowship, all thanks to my humble crop. Before I knew it, the crowd began to disperse, chiming excitedly about the community picnic we decided to throw in the backyard, a celebration of unity and resilience against the HOA's unwarranted fray. We made a plan to relish in the bounty I'd carefully nurtured, indulging in laughter and good-natured veggie sighs. I glanced back at Karen. Still processing the absurdity of her new role, she stood rooted on her lawn, brow slightly softened, though her jewelry remained dauntingly oversized. So, what's a last impression to deliver a punchline? Ah, yes! With a pompous wave, I called out, Hey Karen, hope you like zucchini bread. I hear it's a great way to dissolve petulance. The gathering laughter echoed against her pompous stature, leaving only a sliver of her past as a reminder of the delightful mess we had just spun. What began as a battle transformed into an epic community celebration of forgetting the rules and embracing the absurdity of life.